Okay, this is the second part of my what is the difference between p5.js and processing. And in this particular second part, I'm actually just going to open up processing and p5 themselves and look at how writing code in both of them and what are some actual differences syntax-wise or feature-wise between the two. Okay? And I'll see you at the end of this video. There'll be a third part also where I'm going to make a list of pros and cons. If you missed the first part, you can also find in the description a link to the first part where I kind of did a macro view of the bigger picture of these two environments. All right, see you in a bit, I guess, because I'm just here, me talking, camera, video thing. Okay, so I'm back here. The two websites, if you're looking at P5 and processing, P5 is at p5.js.org. Here's the website here. You can download the library files and find some information about how to get started with an editor on this website. And I'll talk a bit about that once I open an editor. Processing.org, this is the processing website. And you can go here to download the actual processing software editor environment for Mac, PC, that sort of thing. So I've already done that, and I have both of those things here. If you have trouble with that, you can write something in the comments, and hopefully I or somebody else following the comments can jump in and help. But also, by the way, actually, if you really have technical questions about processing in P5, I would suggest you go and ask them at forum.processing.org. So the YouTube comments are a nice place to give feedback and for me to hear from you, but it's not the best place to discuss code or ask technical questions. The forum is really the best place for that. You can always tweet me a link to a post on the forum and I'll be able to follow it and chime in there as well. Okay, so I'm going to minimize the browser here. And so here I have, I want to say I have both environments going, but this is actually the processing software, the desktop editor itself, which is open. It's got a little window where I can write my code. It's got the run button up here. It's got a stop button. It's got some stuff about modes, because something I can do is I can actually switch to Python. I can actually do p5.js in the processing editor as well with a p5.js mode. These modes won't necessarily be there for you by default. You'll need to go to this add mode, which opens something called the contribution manager, so which you can add libraries and modes and tools and examples and that sort of thing. So this is actually new interface for what's really nice about having a desktop editor is adding libraries or finding examples. All of this can be done through the interface itself. With P5, the way that I'm going to show you P5 right here is this is just an editor called Atom. Atom is made by GitHub. It's open source. It's free. It lets you type your code. There's packages you can install to see your code automatically in the browser, or syntax highlight in a different way, or have special keyboard commands. But any text editor, I might suggest looking at Sublime or Brackets or CodePen, which is an online web editor. And at some point, if people are interested, I can make different videos with different editors to see how different people have those things set up. So that's the primary difference that in just sort of working in these environments is processing. My suggestion is you just download it and use it. With P5, you want to find an editor that you like or that a friend uses that they recommend to you and work with it that way. And there's suggestions and information about that also on the p5.js website. And you can see that I just have all the files associated with the sketch right here. There's my JavaScript file, which is where I type the code. There's an HTML file where I can add HTML. And if you do my sort of foundations of programming in P5 videos, I'll go through what all those different files do. And then, libraries that I might want to add, these are the P5 libraries. They're just JavaScript files. If I want to add other libraries, I've got to manually download them, add them to this folder, or refer to them. Libraries, you can also refer to them that are on a web server somewhere through a URL. There's lots of different ways of doing it beyond the scope of what I'm doing in this video. Unlike processing, we kind of have everything all in one here. Now, the other difference is what happens when you quote unquote run your code. So both of these are a simple sketch. Both processing and P5 are built with this concept of setup and draw for an animation program. Setup happens once to kind of set up your program, initialize variables, everything to start with. Draw loops, it's an animation loop, because most sketches and programs that you might want to write, you want an animation. And of course, you can stop the animation, start the animation, have no animation, do all sorts of different other things, but that's the sort of core functionality. So if I run a processing sketch, you'll see I get a window. So processing sketches are desktop applications. And actually, I can go up here, File, Export Application. And if I go to Export Application, what you're going to see is I can actually make a double-clickable application that I could release or send for Windows, Mac, Linux. I could make it full screen. I could need Java to run. So here on Mac, if somebody does it, you could actually embed Java. And there's some goofiness with Apple, and I don't want to get into this, but it's definitely an issue with new operating systems that Apple doesn't want you to use applications that aren't signed and delivered and deemed worthy of their operating system, so to speak. So that can be a little bit tricky, but absolutely does work. Now, P5, this is just stuff that is web files. So you can put it on a web server. If you have a web server account, you can have it on your computer and open it up through the browser. And typically what I do is I run a local server, and I'm doing that through Terminal, and I have other videos that kind of walk through the steps of that. And then if I want to see the result of my code, I just go to the browser, and I have it here. And you can see here I'm running a little web server, which then I can view the results of that web server at an address called localhost, and my sketch is called QA_P5, and 8000 refers to the port. And so at some point this is just kind of like seeing how it works and developing, and then I might upload my code and the URL would no longer say localhost because my code's not on this laptop, but might be on my server schiffman.net. So that's a core difference. The p5.js is going to run your code and you're going to see the results in the browser. Processing, it's going to launch as a desktop application. There are some things that actually make them quite different then, because for example, I'm going to put full screen in setup, and I'm going to say background frame count modulus. Oh, no, I'm not going to write any crazy code. I'm just going to say background 100, comma 0, comma 200. And if I run this, processing now knows how to make a full screen window automatically, whatever my resolution is, and it's got this like purple color. So because if you're in a desktop environment, it's a little easier. I can say full screen, and I can actually give it a number, which is if I'm connected to a projector, it would go straight to that projector and that sort of thing. But the main function you write in processing typically is size, which would make a window of 600 by 400, and when I run, that's what I've got here. In P5, I'm actually going to say create canvas. There's subtle differences, the same concept, 600 by 400, and then I could take this background code and I could put it in here, and that's identical, and I could now go and hit refresh, and we can see I have my, whoops, shoot. I had the font bigger here, but I didn't want it bigger there. I could see, and this, by the way, over here is a JavaScript console. That's available as part of you under View, Developer, JavaScript Console. So this is something I use a lot for debugging to see error messages. And so that's something that you might want to figure out how you get a console to see error messages as part of your workflow as well. But I'm just using the Chrome one because it works pretty well. Yeah. Okay, so you can see that this is the same exact code, but in two different environments. Let's highlight some other key differences. Java syntax, void. Functions, Java is a typed language, meaning if a function I have to say void means it doesn't return anything. If it's going to return a number, I have to say what kind of thing. In JavaScript, I just only ever say function. Same thing if I want to add a variable. Float x equals 100. Float y equals 100, and then I might use the ellipse function, ellipse, x comma y, 60 comma 60, right? If I want to add that code over here, var x equals 100, var y equals 100, add that here. So you can see very, very similar, but because here I'm writing in JavaScript, so I adopt JavaScript syntax. Over here, I'm writing in Java, so I adopt Java syntax. Java is typed. I always must specify float, meaning it's a floating point number, so I could say 100.7, that sort of thing. So now I can run this, and we can see I've got my ellipse, and I can go back to the browser, and I can hit refresh. Oh, what did I do? I forgot to hit save. So I have to hit save, and then I can hit refresh, and I've got my ellipse. So you can see a lot of the API is the same. A lot of the API is the same, but the syntax of the language is different. Some things, variables are the same except for type. If statements are the same in both. If this, oh, no, not this. If Boolean expression, else if, else, those are the same. Loops, for, while are the same. Objects and arrays are quite different in both of those environments, and that would be beyond the scope of what I'm doing in this particular video, but I do have tutorials on arrays in both environments. You could watch those and objects and sort of see what the differences are. At some point I could come and highlight that sort of stuff. So what I want to do, so this is kind of like a basic view of how these two environments. What I want to do now is return to the whiteboard and And what I want to do is return to the whiteboard and make a list of sort of pros and cons of each and talk about speed or performance or features and that sort of thing, and kind of give you a sense of why you might choose one versus the other. And then, of course, I think it's also important to reference some other programming languages and environments like C++ and perhaps open frameworks, or Python and some of the data and number stuff and machine learning kind of text, working with text and natural language processing kind of types of things too, and where you might go outside of P5 and processing as well. So I'm going to head over to the whiteboard to have that discussion. Okay, so what I want to do now is kind of make a little comparison chart between the two environments and think about kind of pros and cons of each, and where you might choose one for a certain project or the other, kind of depending on what you're trying to do. So I would say, first of all, primary key thing here. If you are making something and you want to release that thing on the web in a browser, this is where P5 excels. P5 is a JavaScript library. You can publish your stuff to the web in the way that you would publish anything written in JavaScript to the web. You can integrate it with HTML, CSS. You can do DOM manipulation. So in other words, and in this sense, I'll make another note here, which is GUI. So for interface elements, if you want to have a text box that people type their name in to interact with your program, or buttons and sliders, anything that you would natively have as interface elements in a web browser, you can create those, manipulate those, work with those using the p5.js library. There's actually an additional library part of p5, which is p5.dom.js, that has a lot of this functionality in it. So that's really a major, major advantage here in terms of the web. Processing used to be about exporting to the web with Java applets, but now processing is really desktop, for desktop applications, not really for, you can still make a Java applet probably, but I don't know how much good that's going to do you. That said, there are interface libraries for processing, Control P5, Interfacia, there's probably some other ones, but they're often limited in terms of how much you can style them or design them or use them, and it can be awkward. But I will say an important thing is, though, if interface is the question, both of these environments have a drawing canvas. So you're only limited by your imagination and time in terms of what kind of interfaces you can invent. But if you want to prototype a quick interface, just have like a text box and some buttons, you're going to be able to do that much more easily in P5. If you want to invent your own design and style of interface, both of these environments will allow you to do that simply by drawing into the canvas. So that's kind of a key thing. One thing I would say here now, but this also relates to performance. So speed is a big question here. And I would say this would go under the processing column. Now, there are certainly exceptions to this. Speed and how performance is always a complicated puzzle of many different factors. What are you doing? What's the environment? What's the computer? But in general, Java programs, particular ones that are iterating over pixels or drawing many particles, those are going to run much faster in Java in processing than they would Canvas in the browser. A lot of that has to do with the compiled versus interpreted language, how fast browsers are, and that all this stuff changes rapidly. I'm sure by the time you're watching this video in the future from your floating cloud car thing or whatever, that this will be completely irrelevant. But this is something where certainly if what you're looking for is to eke as much speed out of graphics itself, processing probably has a slight leg up there. Now, one big exception to that in a way is anything that involves OpenGL or 3D. So I'm going to say OpenGL 3D. Now, processing has rendering environments, rendering modes called P3D or P2D, and these make use of Opengl Rendering. Opengl Rendering is an engine that uses the power of your computer's graphics card as opposed to its regular processor stuff to draw to your computer screen. And computers now have very fast and powerful graphics cards, so you can often get, you can do 3D stuff, and you can often get a lot of additional speed of drawing by using these rendering modes. Now, there is something called Webgl, which is an implementation of OpenGL, stands for Open Graphics Libraries, for the browser. And there's a wonderful library called 3.js, which if you're interested in doing 3D stuff for the web, you might want to explore. P5 has a Webgl rendering mode, and so I'm sure there's subtlety to this, but in many ways, you would get equivalent speeds in both of these environments if you're using Opengl Render, because all it does is really depend on your graphics card. But the truth of the matter is Webgl is one of the newer aspects of P5 and isn't fully implemented yet as compared to P3D rendering and processing, which has been around for many years and has had a lot of time to develop. So for me, I might say if you want to do a complex, sophisticated 3D rendering system, your choices are, you might want to lean towards using processing, but if you want it to be on the web, you might experiment with P5's Webgl mode, but you also might consider if you really need to dive into more elaborate 3D, using something that's had more time to develop and wait for this, or come and contribute to help make Webgl better. Of course, you could, all these things are built on top of existing systems, so Webgl is something you can just do natively in the browser itself if you want to go down that road and learn how that works. Okay, I'm pausing for a minute here where we could probably edit out my thinking. I should go look, because probably going to, at a certain point I want to go look at questions, because I'm sure people have specific questions. I'm trying to think of what would be worth mentioning next. Okay, so I'm going to keep going now. So related to this performance thing and related to desktop versus web is I might add sort of in between here is like installation-based work. I don't know what I mean by that, but like kiosks or projection mapping or interactive museum exhibits, that sort of thing. Processing is very geared towards that kind of work now. I showed you that it has the function full screen, which gives you high-speed full-screen graphics. You can control very easily which projector, if you're connected to a bunch of projectors spanning across them. Processing, because it now is desktop application environment, has access to do all this sort of like high-speed full-screen kind of stuff. Now, of course, you can make your browser full screen, and so you can do all this stuff in P5 as well. But this is, I suppose, if I'm thinking about, I'm making a project and I want it to live on the web for people to experience, then we've got a lot of advantages to P5. I'm making a project and I want it to live in a museum kiosk environment, then you might have some advantages to processing. And I should mention here that a lot of these, all the things that I'm saying of processing, another environment that you might explore sometime related to this is something called Open Frameworks. Can you actually see this? I don't know. Open Frameworks. There's also an environment called Cinder. Both of these are actually just really libraries. They don't have an editor associated with them, though they have tutorials. And these are creative coding open source frameworks for C++. And so if you're looking to like squeeze every inch of speed out, you can like, you know, processing nowadays, especially if you're using P3D and on a really fast computer, I think you'll probably get a lot of comparable. But certainly working in C++, because you kind of have a lower level access to the computer. I talked about this sort of Java virtual machine. That layer limits the performance. You can get even more speed, and especially if you're doing computer vision. Also, there are so many computer vision libraries that are written in C++, so you have quick integration with them, and there are a lot of great examples, and certainly 3D rendering and all this sort of stuff. But I'm a little off topic, but this seemed like an important point to mention, especially in the context of doing installation, kiosk-based work. So another piece of this is integrating with hardware. And how about data? Let's talk about data first. So data I would put right between these two things, because both of these environments have features and functionality for working with data. So both of them have a function called load table. I'm going to write it over here. Load table allows you to load a spreadsheet and work with it in processing to visualize or crunch numbers or do whatever. P5 also has that function, but I'm going to write over here load JSON. So both of them have load JSON and load table. The reason why I'm putting load table over here and load JSON over here is one point that I might make is, let's say you have a massive data set and you want to create this like big poster-sized print about this like massive data set. Processing, being a Java-based desktop environment, is probably going to have an easier time loading into memory and working with large data sets. P5, just running in the browser, probably going to have an easier time with smaller data sets. But because it's written in JavaScript, a lot of data comes from APIs and with JSON file formats. That's really easy to work with in JavaScript, because JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. That's what JavaScript is made for. It's the same syntax. So this, while you can load JSON, that's Java syntax for working with JSON, is quite a bit more awkward. It works. So in that sense, you can work with data. And certainly, since you're on the web web and in the browser, you know, a lot of working with APIs, if you find a tutorial for like how to use this API, it's most likely going to be geared towards working in a web-based environment like JavaScript. And so you know, in that sense, there could be good reasons for working with certain kind of web-based data sets. With P5, there could be good reasons for parsing and crunching. There's a lot of functionality and features of how you can manipulate data in processing and kind of work with larger data sets. So that's, I think, an important aspect. Another thing that I would put here is hardware. So there are, because processing is a project that's been around for over 15 years now, there are so many third-party libraries that you can add through the interface that I showed you to work with things like the Kinect or the Leap Motion or an Arduino or a joystick or some other brain sensor thing. So generally speaking, if there's a Java interface towards a piece of hardware, there's probably a way to do it in processing. And a lot of people with kind of common hardware interfaces have encountered this and published an open source library for it. Now, the thing is, you can also use hardware with P5. For example, the Leap Motion, if you go to the Leap Motion websites, there's a JavaScript library. So if you see a JavaScript library, this is actually kind of a fundamental difference. A Java library will work with processing, but you might have a hard time unless someone's made a processing version of that Java library or that acts as a bridge. There are ways around that, of course, but P5, if you find a JavaScript library, you can just plug it right in because you don't really need a separate P5 library for the Leap Motion. You just need the Leap Motion JavaScript library that you can use in your code. But one tricky thing about hardware is the browser has so many security restrictions. So the browser can't read files on your hard drive. It can't just talk to your camera without you giving it permission, that sort of thing. Whereas those security restrictions aren't there for desktop applications. So a lot of hardware, while you can access in both environments, you likely need something to act in the middle. And I'm just going to write Node here. And there is a project called P5 Serial, which is a Node server that you can run to get serial communication from an Arduino to P5, whereas a lot of that stuff you can do just more natively right here in processing. Have I gone below? I'm at the bottom of what you can see. Okay, so that I think is an important aspect of this as well. So I'm sure I missed a whole bunch of things here. This is just kind of what came to the top of my head right now. So I'm going to go and check the live chat. If you're watching this as an archived video, there's no live chat, but I'm going to see if there's some questions about it, and I'll answer some of those to sort of wrap up or fill in some of the gaps that I've got going here. All right? Thanks very much.